Authors Unplugged. I'm so excited to be here with Lynne Connolly and Alyxandra Harvey. Ladies, thanks so much for taking the time to join us.
Hello.
So I'm really excited about these books. I've loved the Cinderella Society covers since they first came across my desk. They're just absolutely charming. And Lynne's covers for her new series are this like beautiful, almost Parisian pink and black. They're lovely. So I'm very excited to hear about your books, ladies. Alexandra, can you tell us a little bit about It's How to Marry a Duke, which
It is.
is a good life goal.
As you do. It's the second book in the Cinderella Society. So it's the book about Meg. There's 3 in this series, and it's 3 friends. You can read them out of order. There'll be minor spoilers, but the major sort of arc is for each personal character. So you can sort of mix them up if you want to. But Meg, ironically, is the only one who is not interested in history. So the first book was about Persephone, and she's obsessed with ancient Egypt and archaeology. And it's mostly because the Cinderellas, as they're called, are the goddaughters of the Duke of Pendleton. And the Duke of Pendleton loves all things ancient Rome and ancient Egypt, and he loves archaeology and barrow digging. So all of his goddaughters are pretty much raised to like history because it's good if the Duke likes you. Meg does not. She could care less, but she likes her friends and she likes the Duke, and she loves art. She's an artist. She's a spinster, and she's kind of a thief. She's a bit of a pickpocket. Her part of the Cinderella story is that her uncle is in charge of the estate. She's the daughter of a viscount. When her parents died, her uncle inherited the estate and essentially spent her dowry. So her little Cinderella thing is that she has no dowry. Her house was stolen. Her estate was stolen. But she has the Duke and she has the Cinderellas and she has her art. And the Duke of Pendleton sends her to the new Duke of Thorncroft's house to draw all of his antiques.
There are dukes everywhere.
Dukes everywhere. It's a good problem, maybe. The previous Duke of Thorncroft was also a collector, and he's left his collection to the Duke of Pendleton. The Duke of Pendleton is in his 70s and is not really interested in traveling all that way. So Meg goes in his place. And the new Duke of Thorncroft, of course, is very handsome and very single. He used to be a millhouse worker, manager, and he was the last of the line. So he was sort of plucked out of Manchester and dropped into this duchy and has kind of like no idea what's going on. And the prince has decided, the Prince of Wales, this is not historical at all, by the way, but the Prince of Wales has decided that the Duke has to marry within 3 months for romance reasons. As the Fated Mates podcast will tell you, I love that quote. So his house is being overrun by house tours of single ladies trying to get a glimpse of him. And he's kind of made another gentleman angry. So that gentleman has let it be known that there is a treasure at Thorncroft Abbey. So the house is just full of insane people trying to get a glimpse of the Duke, trying to find the treasure. Meg is trying to draw things and try to pretend that he's not handsome and delightful. And it's essentially a story of all these really strange characters coming together, like a found family.
Mm-hmm. Well, that sounds like so much fun, and I love found families, and I love that there's a connection with the Cinderellas. That's such a lovely idea. Awesome. Well, that sounds like so much fun. And how many more books are there in this series?
There's 3 in the series. There's 3 in my head, so you never know. But there's 3 completed.
Awesome. Well, that sounds like so much fun.
Thank you.
So, Lynne, you were saying your book is The Only Honest Man in London, which is a lovely title. And it's the first book in a brand new series. You were talking about it being a spin-off from your Pirates. Is that right?
Well, the first the first hero appeared in the Lion's Den series.
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry, I got it twisted in my head.
Yeah, that's okay. He was the hero of that book's best friend, Lion Eyes, I called it. Mm-hmm. He was the hero's, who is a duke, best friend. He's a military man. He needs money, but unfortunately he doesn't get it in that series. But he does get promoted, so he's doing all right. But he's got 3 very beautiful sisters, and they decide to try their hand at a London season. And the main trilogy is about those 3 sisters, Viola, Juliet, and Bianca. I based them on the Gunning sisters. They were in the mid-18th century, but this is set in the Regency. You know, I just borrowed a bit. They were three sisters who took London by storm, and it's a true story. One of them became a duchess twice because she was widowed. One of them became a countess and died young. Oh, sad, mine doesn't.
Thank goodness.
The third one married a gentleman, but she's not going to in my series. But I thought if it could happen in real life, then it could happen in my book. So I put them in my series. The first one is The Only Honest Man in London is Viola, all Shakespearean. And she meets the Earl and by falling at his feet, literally. Because she's got a disability. It's a slight spoiler, not much of a spoiler because it comes out in chapter 3. Mm-hmm. She's lost the big toe on her right foot after an accident.
Oh, goodness.
So she falls over a lot. He thinks because he's a catch that she fell at his feet on purpose, but she didn't, and she's very embarrassed. And the next time she meets him is when he's with his friend and they're going to the Pool of London, which is where all the ships were landed, and to look over a ship that his best friend has won in a card game, of course.
Like you do.
Yes, and she's there with her mother, and they're buying fabric to make into their gowns because they're penniless. Mm-hmm. And she falls at his feet again because she turns around too suddenly, and he's going, "Oh yes," and she's very upset, very angry that he assumes that she's doing it on purpose, mm-hmm. and in a very disreputable part of London where she's not supposed to be. But this is where I did some research. This is where you went to get really good stuff cheap because it was offloaded off the ships, and
it's like London Outlet Mall.
Absolutely, yes. A lot of this stuff was back. Do you know what backhanded means? Mm-hmm. You know, you Captain a guinea, and he'll say, "You can have that," mm-hmm. and so they go and do
something falls off a truck.
Yeah, pretty much. So they pile a cart full of fabric and go home and hope he doesn't remember, but of course he does. And his friend who wins the ship is an inveterate gambler, dazzling handsome and a duke, but he's a little bit no good. The hero eventually he realizes that she's just clumsy, and he offers, and she's awful at riding. She used to be okay, but now she's lost. This is a recent accident when she lost her toe, first two toes. And that really is based on my sister who's diabetic and lost her toes. Oh. And she found it really hard learning to walk again, mm-hmm. because the back is upset. It's also wobbly, and it's kind of a tribute to her because she just did it. She was so good. My sister, I mean. She just kept going until she learned it. But Viola's having to learn it too fast, too soon. And then she has to be presented at court. And you know, at court, they had to walk backwards with a train. They weren't allowed. So
6 foot on her head.
Yeah, with the plumes and everything. There's a trick to doing it, but when you're missing 2 toes on 1 foot, it's quite tricky. And by this time, the hero realizes there's something wrong here, and he sort of helps her. And you know how they do in these romances? He drags her into a side room, and you know.
Confident.
Yeah, so the story goes on. The Boyle sisters are adventuresses, and each volume is about each sister, but it brings the others in.
Oh, and wonderful!
Brother in because he's in the army, and he's very good at what he does, and he gets promoted.
Wonderful. So, did you practice walking backwards?
I have done.
Just the first thing I would have done is.
Yeah, see how it's done. You wear a long dress. They used to have dresses with trains that they weren't allowed to hold over their arms, but there were little tricks. I've done it before in a different book set in Georgian England, and in Georgian they used to put canes in the dress set at the bottom so it was stiff, so you could just kick.
It's all about the kick, isn't it?
Yeah. Kick it back as you go, because you're not allowed to turn your back on the monarch at these formal occasions. And they were the court dresses of the time were hideous and huge. They really were.
It's like nobody liked them. You read about them saying dresses are horrible, they're old-fashioned, the plumes are heavy.
Yeah, and they were expensive as well. So, and you couldn't wear them anywhere else because they were just horrible.
The worst bridesmaid dress ever. In yours.
So that goes on from there. And then, of course, the Duke, who's the best friend, gets into trouble and they have to try and rescue him. And one of the other sisters gets involved. But that's getting too far into the story. You'll have to read the book to find out more.
Like a Duke in trouble, though.
There you go.
Like a Duke in trouble.
Oh, yes. And I wanted to make them adventuresses because they've got nothing to fall back on. They have no ancestral homes, although they're well born enough to enter society. But they are just like the Gunnings, who came from Ireland, and my people come from Ireland, and they just have nothing. They do have their grandfather is an earl, but he's cast them off because his son ran off with the woman he didn't want. So that's how they're destitute. Grandfather won't have anything to do with them, and he's Scottish.
That whole casting people off thing seems to happen too easily.
Oh no, you couldn't make them fight for the happy ever after. Viola has to learn not to be so ashamed of what she is.
Mm-hmm. Well, what a lovely tribute to your sister too, to be able to write from that perspective, and I think that's something that lots of us wouldn't consider. I'm still wondering how many people fall.
She's perfectly fine now, but I didn't think it happened to her. They were going to give her a prosthetic toe, only she got a bit. No, it was a bit. Looking at it, it didn't look at all like a toe.
Well, I'm still stuck on how many people would have fallen backwards trying to back away from the monarch. You know,
yes, practice and practice.
Yeah.
You know how they'd have dancing lessons, they'd have backward lessons as part of that in a dress for the train. Oh,
my goodness. I can't imagine managing it. So you obviously had to do some research to figure out about how that whole process went, and even so far as knowing about the canes and the dresses. How did the two of you do the research for your book? I know, Alyxandra, you had a treasure hunt in I think in the first book in your series. How do you go about chasing your ideas?
Sometimes they smack me in the head, and sometimes I'll chase them. For the first book, it was all, I love the mummy and I love archaeology, and I wanted that sort of feeling. So it was a lot of research on barrow digging and sort of the beginnings of archaeology, sort of the grandfathers and the grandmothers of archaeology, and the horrible things that they did now is just like horrifying. They would just, if they found a body, they would just sort of toss it out of the way so they could get to the good stuff. They didn't like keep it safe, exactly. And if they found a mummy after the war, after the Napoleonic War, they would get mummies sent home, and they would, I think I mentioned this before, unwrap them at a party just for fun. Let's unwrap this and see what's what. So those kind of details I love, and I want to put them in books. But for Meg, because she wants nothing to do with history, it was really a lot of details about how to run an estate. How if you come from Manchester, Dougal was a millhouse manager, and now he has this entire estate, several estates actually, and he's essentially running like 8 or 9 businesses at once.
Mm-hmm.
We think of a duke and we think of servants and sitting around and doing nothing, but it was constantly bookkeeping and making sure the orchard was growing and the apples were being picked to make cider to sell, and the crops are being drained, and there's new farming techniques. And these are all things that Meg loves. She loves the Norfolk farming system and this new sort of like rotating crops, because her uncle has essentially bankrupted her father's estates. She stays there and deals with horrible treatment and starts to steal in order to help the tenant. So she learns about farming, and she learns about crop rotation and drainage. And art is where she sort of gets to lose herself. My mother was an artist, and I'm a terrible artist, but it's fun. So I love that part. And for treasure hunting, again, sort of there was the touch of the mummy in the first book, and this one is a touch of Indiana Jones, but it's within an abbey.
Oh, okay.
The Tudor Reformation, Henry VIII, stole everything, took all the churches and took all the treasures. And as he was doing that, a lot of treasures were hidden. And because Thorncroft used to be an abbey, there's lots of stories about hidden gold plates and gold candlesticks. And there's a riddle, which I'm really bad at riddles. So I had a note for the editing process that said, insert riddle here, good luck. Writing the entire book, I think, took less time than finding a riddle that worked for me. But eventually I did. And there's lots of people coming. So there's treasure hunters and fortune hunters and debutantes, and the house is just full. And it's already full of a lot of quirky characters that had a lot of fun. So the treasure hunters are just sort of like icing on the cake at this point, I think.
Oh, cool. Very cool. And I totally understand the idea of riddles, because that's not something that's nuts. I love puzzles. And putting these things
I can't solve them. Writing them is really difficult.
I used to write erotic romance, and very often I'd write a story and I'd get insert sex scene here. Writing it, I'd come back to it later. Yep.
And future you is like, oh, what did you do to me?
I do that too, because I think you don't know them. Like, I don't know them well enough to write how they would make love until I know them a little bit better, which takes 2/3 of the book before you have a real handle on who the people are, and you can write it that way.
Yes, there's a lot of that in it as well.
And plus, sometimes you can't do that with kids screaming in the background or stuff running around. You have to have like quiet.
Sit down, glass of red wine, peace and quiet. Never get that. I'm
sorry, go ahead then.
No, I was just thinking, I did shapeshifter erotic romance. Sometimes I miss those days.
Fun.
But I've always been a historian first and foremost, so that's what I do. Actually, last weekend I went to Tatton Park, and I should be going to Lime Park next week. So that's part of this. Lime Park's where they filmed the Pride and Prejudice, the 90s one with Colin Firth.
Oh, wow.
The best.
There's a statue of Colin Firth in the middle of the pond now.
That's brilliant. That's on my list.
It's very beautiful. I love Tatton Park too. That's fairly close by. I'll be going there on the steam fair. So it's all those old steam-driven things.
Oh, cool.
Steam rollers, and they've got attractions, fairground attractions that are steam-driven and all that. So I'll be going for that.
Oh, that sounds like so much fun. That sounds like so much fun.
And vintage cars. That's how I do a lot of my research. I go there.
I'm in Canada, so it's a little harder.
Yes.
A lot of books and actually a lot of like travel YouTube videos. People will go through, like they'll walk through Hyde Cemetery, and I've been to Hyde Park a long time ago, so just sort of myself. Yeah,
very helpful.
Yes, so helpful.
Cuban tours is really good. You get a feel for the place. I wrote a book once based in Cork Abbey, Calke. When the National Trust took it over, it was a wreck. And instead of, showed the decline of the aristocracy, really. And instead of judging it up to its best look, they left it as it was and preserved it as it was. So if you ever get a chance to see that, it's absolutely fascinating place.
Oh, I imagine. But I love the idea of actually being able to go kind of in and immerse yourself in writing that, so you get the feeling of things. Do you both write? Do you write your stories in order, or do you pull scenes out? Do you have ideas that come to you ahead of time, or are the characters the ones that you get first?
Oh, in order.
I do mostly in order too. I love the idea of being able to write different scenes, but my brain just
no, mine doesn't do it either. I tend to plot, but it's not a big thick plot that's several pages long. It's like a page long where I'm going. But the rest of it comes to me as I write.
There's carrot scenes, right? Where there's like this scene I'm really excited to, so it kind of pushes me to get there. Where if I write it, then I'm like, well, I'm done now.
Exactly. Yes. Yes. I've got points where this has to happen here and this has to happen here, but in between. And then I find things out and I have to go back and rewrite because it's so good.
Every time.
But I think that that's part of the thing that keeps you engaged in the writing, is that little bit of figuring your way through the puzzle to get to the point where you have a complete story.
I love the idea of plotting, but I really half-assed plotter. It's half cancer, half plotter.
Yeah. All over the place.
I'm embarrassed because I never know that I want to know the author of something until I'm talking to people. But I've been rereading Story Genius, and she's talking about that little spark that catches you, the what if this thing happened kind of thing. And I love hearing about how that worked for other people. You know, like for other authors, how is it that you like? What is the spark that catches you? What is the thing that made you want to tell these stories?
It's a different thing at the time. As I told you with the disability thing, it's a very small disability, but it really affects people. So I felt right on that sort of line.
Yeah.
I usually have a character that jumps into my head, and it usually ends up being the first scene in the book, and it is for this one as well, where I saw sort of Meg at a fancy ball. It's the Cinderella ball, and she's stealing from the buffet to bring food to the tenants, and the Duke, who she doesn't know is the Duke, is like, dude, I can see you. And I was like, oh, where do I go from there? And that's generally how I start.
My Dragonblade book was about an ancestress of mine, Hester Bateman, who was a silversmith in London in the 18th century. And she existed, so I sort of embellished her a bit from the story. That's why it's fictional.
I do
start. She was an independent woman. She had her own business. She was widowed early. She had 2 sons, but it was her business, not theirs. So
delightful.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a lovely start. So go ahead.
No, it's okay.
I was just gonna say, it feels like for the last couple of weeks, all the Dragonblade team has been working on, and it's probably just not weeks, it's probably just a week, but it feels like it's been forever that all the Dragonblade team has been working on is getting ready for our Christmas in July launch. So all the novellas are coming out on the 25th of July, and they're like 40 or 41 Christmas novellas that you can read when it's really hot out. And I know Lynne, you said you have a book in that collection as well. That's this part of the same series.
Yes.
Could you talk about that one a little bit for us?
Well, it's about a distant relative of the Brawls, but this was when the botanists were going out to the South Pacific and learning all about plants. So actually, Christmas in July, mine's set in a very hot island in the middle of they marry in a hurry, and he leaves her behind because his ship is leaving, and either he gets on it or he stays at home. So he leaves her on the wedding day, and 6 months later, she's fed up. She hasn't heard from him. She doesn't know whether she's really married or not. So she goes off and finds him. So my story is Christmas in the middle of. It's based on I saw 3 ships come sailing in because the first one brings her to a part of the story. It was a passionate, sudden love affair. So they don't really know each other. So they get to know each other on this island, and he's doing all his research into the plants and some of the creatures, and she's sort of shrieking at the big spiders. And she's a competent woman, so she kind of gets used to it. But she goes to find him initially to say, let's not be married anymore. Let's get a divorce, because he's rich enough to. In those days, the only way you could get a divorce was an act of parliament. There was no such thing as an annulment, and they get to know each other. You know.
I love it when the wedding comes first. I think that those stories are so much fun when the wedding comes first and then the couple falls in love afterwards, and we get to watch it, especially if they don't want to have the wedding to begin with. You know, it's like,
yes. I loved writing it.
Stuck with you forever.
But then I started reading about the botanists who were going out and finding all these new plants and bringing them home. And I just got carried away by the research for a long time.
I can imagine that those would be rabbit holes that you would go down. Is there anything really interesting that you came across while you were researching that one?
Well, rhododendrons and azaleas didn't appear in England until they were brought back in the early 19th century. That surprised me because you can see them in every single garden.
Yeah.
But they're South Pacific. And they're gorgeous.
Yeah, I wouldn't have thought of that either because rhododendron, like that's something, and I'm in Virginia, and so that's something in our forest here. The groves of rhododendrons and
That's amazing.
deciduous azaleas.
And there were some beautiful paintings of these pieces, and they came back and they gave lectures, and I really want to do more on that. That was only a novella. I want to do some more.
Yeah, I can see how that would be really fun to kind of get yourself into both the research for that and then building the character, because
Yes,
you know, you have somebody who's coming back and telling the stories. You get to do the experiencing the story with them, and then the retelling afterwards. I think that would be a really fun thing to write.
well, the heroine's kind of buttoned up at the beginning, but as soon as she gets off the ship, she unbuttons because it's very hot. She has to learn to do things that she's not used to, like sharing a bed with her husband. Things as simple as that, because they had separate rooms.
Mm-hmm.
Mind you,
What
most
did I call that one?
it's called I Saw Three. No, it's called On Christmas Day in the Morning. We toyed with ships and then we changed it to On Christmas Day in the Morning. And the cover is really pretty too. It's just being finalised, but it's gorgeous. And it fits.
The covers are so lovely.
Mm.
You know, the covers are lovely. Well, that one I will not have been. I've been, as I've been putting the books up on the website, I've been thinking snowy things because it's so hot here.
Yeah.
But I will not think snowy thoughts about that one because apparently it's not cold there.
I thought it would make a bit of a change. Especially it's at Christmas.
It makes perfect sense at the time that it originally came out, you know.
Yes.
Perfect sense. Well, Lynne, it was delightful to talk to you today. Can Alyxandra, you have one more book in this series that we know of that's coming out?
How to Marry Whitehead. Yeah. And it's the story of Tamsin and Henry, who's in the first book. He's the one who gets rescued in the first book, so he comes back and
I love a hero we get to see again. That's fantastic. And Lynne, you've got 2 more Burrells after this one.
I'm finalising the second one to send it in, and the third one's all planned out. I know where it's going. So the third one has a lot to do with Petworth and all that stuff. Yeah, what was Marcus saying? In real life, Petworth was a centre of the arts in Cheshire. And it was he was the patron of Turner, who is one of my heroes, but that was slightly later. So I've done something based on that. They're a bit loose and a bit, you know, a bit naughty. And my hero is plunged into the middle of all that and going, what? And my hero's an industrialist in that third book.
That sounds like so much fun. Both of the series sound delightful. So I'm looking forward to both of them. Ladies, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to me today. I really appreciate you being here. I appreciate you sharing your stories with us, and I look forward to talking to you again.
It was lovely. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.